The following is a production of the University of Minnesota.
All right, so we're going to start the session now. This is the Paula Freire grant, Making Critical Connections Through International Community Service. Today we have Sarah Cheetah from the Learning Abroad Center, Laura Dahmer-Hess, and David Holliday from the Community Service Learning Center. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded. They do have a question and answer period at the end, so I'll be walking around with the microphone. If you're not comfortable talking with it into the microphone, you can write your question down and I can ask it for you. And just remember that there's a wrap-up Q&A session after this out in the main Memorial Hall, and that should be wrapped up by about 4:30. So if you can stay for the final event, that would be great. Otherwise, let's take it away.
Thanks, Mandy. Okay, well, welcome everyone to our session today, Making Critical Connections Through International Community Service. And today we'll be talking about the Paula Freire International Community Service Grant, which is a joint venture between the Learning Abroad Center, which I represent, and the Community Service Learning Center, which David and Laura both represent. And so when we first heard the announcement about the conference today, we were right in the throes of selecting the students who will receive the grant this particular summer. So it was really, this grant was really at the forefront of my work, and as a committee, we decided that this would be the perfect opportunity to demonstrate what this grant provides to Twin Cities undergraduate students. So we think that this grant is really a unique grant, first of all, because of the partnership between our two offices. So we're working cross-campus to select students, train students, and welcome students back and help them engage in the community here in the Twin Cities between the two of our offices. It's also a unique grant because it connects the global to the local, which is kind of I think a buzzword in internationalization. It's great to go abroad and learn different things, but how can you bring that back to your local community and create social change here right in the Twin Cities? And it's also based on Paula Freire's philosophy, which David will talk a little bit more about, but it's the only grant I know of that picks out a particular educational philosopher and really encourages students to create projects based on that philosophy. And also, through the Learning Abroad Center, we focus mainly on academic credit programs. So study abroad programs where students go, they receive academic credit, and because they're receiving academic credit, they can receive financial aid, both federal aid, state aid, and aid from the university. And we also have lots of different scholarships for these academic credit-based programs. But we know that there are lots of students who want to go abroad and do opportunities that aren't for credit. And it's a lot more difficult to get funding for these non-credit opportunities, and since students aren't receiving any sort of academic credit, they can't apply financial aid. So I think that this becomes a big barrier for students who want to seek this opportunity, this community service opportunity abroad. Is just the funding is an issue and can often present students with a roadblock. So that is a little bit about the partnership between both of our offices. We'll also talk a little bit about the philosophy behind the grant, some of the logistics of the grant itself and our selection process, what we do to prepare students before they go, and some different examples of projects that students have participated in the past. And then we will hear from two students who have received the grant in the past. Allison Huggle and Sophie Schenk will be talking about their experiences abroad and here in the local community. So some quick introductions here. First, my coworker, Brooke Blahnik, unfortunately couldn't be with us today. It's kind of joyous. I got an email yesterday that his wife was in labor, so hopefully by now they have a new baby. But unfortunately he couldn't be here today, so we're covering his sections for him. And then do both of you want to stand up and introduce yourselves too? Oh, sorry.
I'm Laura Dahmer-Hess. I work in the Community Service Learning Center.
And I'm David Holliday. I also work in the Community Service Learning Center.
And, I don't know if this is sad. I'm Allison Hugo. I'm one of the recipients.
And I'm Sophie Schenk. I'm another one of the past recipients.
Mm-hmm. And Brooke and Laura and David and I have been working together for, I think, about 4 years. This will be the fourth summer that we've worked together on this grant. Okay.
Okay, well, this grant is named after Paula Freire. Has everybody heard of Paula Freire before? Some of you? Okay. We handed out just a little half sheet of information on Paula Freire, and the purpose of this grant really is to support and embrace the pedagogy, the critical pedagogy that he developed in Brazil. He's a educational philosopher, practitioner, administrator. He's specifically focused on a lot of literacy initiatives within his country in Brazil, and his main goal was really to provide service in a way that actually put the teacher and the learner on a level playing field. One of the quotes here is he criticized the educational model of banking, in which students are viewed as an empty vessel to be filled by the teacher. That's one of the things that he was critical of and developed programs to address that. And then his other main goal was to actually create a critical consciousness within the people that he was working with so that they could actually learn about and make change themselves. So the person giving service was not the one giving service in order to change their situation. They were enabling the people to change the world that they live in. So those are really the key things about Paula Freire. I do have a bigger quote from Wikipedia. Hopefully it's okay to reference Wikipedia these days. That has more information on him. And his real seminal work was called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and that was published in 1970. So a really important piece and something that we really embrace and try to embody through this grant process. And we do really put the students, the applicants, through the ringer. We do an interview process where we actually ask the students to articulate Freirean philosophy in their own words and how their project specifically applies to Freirean philosophy. And it's something we really look for in grant applicants and the recipients, and it's something we find really is important. Quickly, the nuts and bolts of the grants. I know Laura is going to talk a little bit more about the structure. We do some pre-departure training and work with students. They go on their expedition over the summer. They have to do at least 8 weeks of service in another country, and then they come back. And that's another part of the project and something that we help to support students is how they bring the learning and the experiences they had back here to the local community. Amounts awarded. We say in our marketing materials that we award grants up to $2,000. Some students receive full grant money. Oftentimes we divide it between multiple applicants. Normally we give between $500 and $2,000 to really support students that are doing this really great and important work. Our selection process, we do have students submit an application, a written application, including short answer essays to a series of questions. Again, one of the most important one is how does your project embody Freirean philosophy? We as a grant committee, the four of us, look through all of that information, look through their essays, and then we select a few people to interview. And then those interviewees come in, we ask them a series of questions, really wanting to get to know them and make sure they understand Paula Freire and that their project really does go along with Freirean philosophy. So we're really excited. We've worked with a great group of students over the last 4 or 5 years through this grant. We're really excited for some past recipients to be here and also current recipients who you'll meet later on. I'm going to turn it over to Laura, and she's going to talk to you about the pre-service training.
So I think that we've gone back and forth about what we actually call this meeting. A few years ago, we did call it pre-service training because it was one and the same as the training that students take through the Community Service Learning Center before taking a service learning course. So it was a training that we called Critical Perspectives on Community Involvement that really asked students to problematize the word service and what it means to do service. And to challenge students to think about working with rather than doing for. And the content of that session was a really good match for students involved with the Freire grant, but there were a couple of reasons why we've decided in the last couple of years to change that process a little bit. One of the reasons was that it didn't seem to be the exact match in terms of community building. The students in that case the students receiving the Freire grant weren't able to meet each other. Usually didn't meet each other until after returning from the summer doing community work abroad, because there were a variety of different sessions that they could attend pre-service with other students in service learning courses. And so we really have, in the last couple of years, thought there could be some good benefit in getting these students together before the summer. The other reason is that we really saw the opportunity in the last couple of years in having the students meet together beforehand, just in that small group, to really explore Freirean philosophy in more depth. And many of the students, as David said, come to these interviews, and we are really amazed and really grateful to have, interact with students who have such a deep understanding of Freirean philosophy and can bring so much to those conversations. And so we really want to begin opening up this, and we have begun steps to opening up this training process to be more of a workshop or discussion, where we bring some discussion items, activities, and readings, but so do the participants in the program, the grant recipients, and they're able to do that together and to get to know one another. So currently that is a one-time 2-hour session, workshop and discussion format. And one of the reading, we're incorporating readings from Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and now readings that the students are proposing themselves. But one of our sort of standard go-to articles has also been To Hell with Good Intentions. So I'll skip over the summer. I'll skip the good part. No, it's all good parts. But the students here will talk more about the bulk of the grant. But after the students return from their summer doing their community work project, they enroll in a semester-long service learning course. Those courses are most often coordinated by the Community Service Learning Center. And each service learning course at the University of Minnesota requires about 20 to 30 hours of community-based work with local nonprofit organizations. The three main points for service learning courses at the University of Minnesota are that it has academic content rooted in a discipline or multiple disciplines, that it involves this 2 to 3 hours a week usually of community work, and that it also involves both in-class and out-of-class reflection that tie these things together. So these are a few examples of some of the service learning courses that students are able to enroll in. There's usually about 30 course offerings of service learning courses per semester. And then some of the courses are highlighted here that are some fairly popular courses. And one thing to note is that as the grant itself and the summer projects themselves are very flexible, and students are doing work in many different types of work, there's that same flexibility in the post-trip service, where some students are doing direct service tutoring one-on-one through a class like English 3741, the Literacy and American Cultural Diversity, where they're tutoring English language learners. And then there's also opportunities for students to do more indirect service, working with activist or grassroots organizing nonprofits as well. So that's one of the things about the grant that's been really fun for us, I think. And another reason we want to get those students together is because their perspectives on community work and on international community work are quite different based on the work that they've engaged in. I'll turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, so who's the grant for? There's not one particular type of student that we're looking for when we are awarding the grant. Students come from a variety of different disciplines here on campus. They also bring a variety of different international and intercultural experiences with them, as well as linguistic preparation. So we've had students who have gone abroad their first time as a recipient of the Paula Freire grant. We've also had students who have maybe studied abroad in a particular location and done an internship or some other community work, and they want to go back now the following summer to continue that work and really to learn more and gain a deeper understanding of the community. And then some people who maybe have been to that country but not that particular region of the country. So we really welcome a wide range of applicants, and really when we're reviewing applications, we're looking for, like David said, a true understanding of Paulo Freire and his philosophy and feasibility of the project as well. So as you can see here, there's a lot of different past projects. They're all over the board. We've had IT students like the micro hydroelectric systems. One of that particular recipient had participated in the MSID Ecuador program, the Minnesota Studies and International Development program, through the Learning Abroad Center. So she had a very high Spanish language level when she went, and she had done some similar work with the MSID program, but for her actual grant experience chose to go to Bolivia to work with hydroelectric systems there. We've also had students, so that's a great example of a student who has really developed something in line with their major and what they're working on here at the university. We've also had students, a student a couple of summers ago who focused on deaf education in Bolivia. And this was a personal interest of hers, and she had been studying American Sign Language since she was very young, and so she went to Bolivia to work with that in the community there. Yeah, so there's a wide range of projects, and Sophie and Allison will both be talking about what they chose for their projects. So I will turn it over to them, but first I will introduce both of them before they begin speaking. First of all, Sophie. Sophie is a junior studying global studies and gender, women, and sexuality studies here at the university. She's a 2009-10 recipient of the Davis Putter Scholarship, which provides grants to students who are actively working for peace and justice. And this is a scholarship that's awarded to those able to do academic work at the university level and who are also part of the progressive movement on campus and in the community. So currently, Sophie is doing labor organizing and outreach with SEIU, Service Employees International Union, in the Twin Cities community. So Sophie is an example of a student who studied abroad. She studied abroad in 2006 in Venezuela, and she did go back to Venezuela for the Paula Freire grant as well in the summer of 2009. So for her community service project, she worked with FREDICO, the Union of Occupied Factories, which is a labor rights organization. And she's currently a junior, so she's graduating next year, and then plans to return to Venezuela again for about a year before heading to graduate school. And Allison is a senior studying journalism and French here at the university, and she received the grant in the summer of 2007 to volunteer with the YMCA in Senegal. And she spent the first week in Dakar observing kindergarten teachers, and then traveled to Ziguinchor, did I say it correctly? Okay,
Perfect.
all right, to teach an English class to members of the YMCA. And she's been involved with the Society of Professional Journalists and has also had internships with KSTP and the Star Tribune. And Allison will be graduating in May and hopes to start a career as a reporter somewhere in the U.S. So if you have any openings, let her know.
It's a struggling time right now.
But she would eventually like to go to law school to study international human affairs law or international media law. So I will turn it over to both of our students right now, and they can talk about their experience. We've asked them both to focus on different aspects of their experience and the grant and their community work here in the Twin Cities. And then we would like to introduce to you the students who will be going abroad this summer, and then we hope to have some time for questions as well. So Sophie, do you want to start?
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
Yeah. Hello. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the grant. I thought maybe I would just start with sort of a summary from my perspective as a student as to what this grant means. And I really think that this service grant is virtually unique in its constitution because of the virtue of its objectives, as they were talking about, because it really does empower and enable students from the global north to engage in political and social work, which minimizes the reproduction of entrenched. Unequal relations of power. And I think that we see these relationships transmitted often as particularly university students sort of leverage their privileges of cosmopolitan travel and try to either do good or to study abroad in other countries. In Pedagogy of the Press, as was mentioned, Freire writes, solidarity requires that one enter into the situation with those who one is in solidarity with. It is a radical posture. providing funding for these expressions of solidarity is most certainly a radical posture, and one which enables transformative and reciprocal relationships, and which enables sort of these relationships that are transnational in character and built internationally over continuous obstacles, as I think some of us have experienced, and really do strengthen our understanding of movement building and social justice. So, as Sarah mentioned, I spent this summer working with FRETECO, the Union of Occupied Factories in Venezuela. Just a little bit of background on that. Faced with increasing factory abandonment as part of sort of the international investors and declining working conditions, workers across Venezuela have sort of taken to occupying factories in order to restart production or to improve conditions as a measure of leveraging their support from the community against bosses who don't want to pay out wages that are due. So those are typically the two situations in which a factory is occupied, either because it's been abandoned or because conditions have degraded to the point that workers need to take it over. The union itself functions as part of the sort of national project in union building. So given the geopolitical reality of Venezuela, the labor movement has a particularly unique character, as if that description didn't help spur some of those ideas. So the actions of Chavez's government have allowed, for a challenge to the historical position of workers in Venezuela by empowering them to take space for mobilization, independent knowledge production and education, and unionization. At the same time, however, his model for achieving social change has run dangerously close to reascribing the sort of elite knowledge which Freire warned against, which will happen particularly when sort of elements of sort of a radical or more left-leaning group sort of take charge and then sort of reinscribe particular models of liberation or particular models of how workers are to achieve organizing or workers' rights. And so I think that the FRETECO marks a labor organizing group and committee that's really committed to thinking through some of these questions and truly trying to think through an autonomous way of organizing that allows for workers to truly have the dignity, conditions, and also sort of function within as part of the national economy. So keeping the themes of solidarity and knowledge production in mind, I'd just like to highlight a few elements of my project and then talk about how the grant has shaped my engagements here in the Twin Cities. So from the first night that I arrived in Venezuela, I was put on a bus to go to a meeting that happened at 7 a.m. the next day, in which a group of 300 workers voted to take over one of the factories in a state that was very close to Caracas, named Eswatini. And the meeting went on all day with workers discussing with the employers and everybody else. It was a large community gathering. Everybody was invited to the park. There were probably 600 people there total, discussing the reasons for occupying this factory in relationship to conditions of work and in relationship to the fact that the Constitution allows education and these workers were not getting permission to leave work or to get hours off in order to pursue higher education. And so by the end of the day, the workers had voted to take over the factory, and we left that day and went to the factory site and took over the lawn, right? And so as that fight progressed, we ended up moving inside the factory as negotiations continued between two parties. And as part of my job there was a continuous sort of note-taking / interviewing and generating the material that would then go into both the newspaper that was transmitted nationally, but also into different pamphlets that the union could then provide to other struggles that were happening throughout the country. One of the central things that I was involved in as well when I was there, beyond sort of that sort of note keeping, which was a great task in terms of challenging the expert knowledge of U.S. students. There was not a lot that I could do for anybody in Venezuela. Everybody knew more about the history, more about how to organize, more about how to give speeches, more about how to. There's really no list of anything that I could do, which was better than any comrade or student or worker who were there. So what I could do was take notes and record and transcribe, and it was a great experience to be in that position. One of the things two things that I would just like to talk about really briefly that culminated. One was a Pan-American conference in which we had members or workers from about 8 or 9 different countries come down, Brazil, like of other occupied movements. And so that conference, in which we just had tons of workers talking about different strategies for organizing and different models to continue to communicate, and I continue to be in discussion with these workers, was an incredible experience, both organizing the conference and then being a participant. And then sort of the last part is the culmination of a lot of this work, for me, culminated in a 12-day walk from one of the occupied factories that I was working with to Miraflores, which is the presidential palace. And we walked 12 days, and it was an incredibly physically intense, emotionally intense, politically intense, the entire time discussing politics. The hope was to meet with Chavez. That did not end up happening, but it was a series of meetings with the Ministry of Labor as soon as we got there. So the entire 12 days was just this, between 8 and 11 hours of walking a day, and then just continuous political discussion at night. And these are sort of the conditions of workers' movements there, which are radically different than the conditions here, and as you can imagine, and as I'll talk to very briefly, have really informed my understanding of how we make these alliances and how we consider work organizing within the labor movement in the United States to make stronger transnational alliances for the conditions of workers under a failing economy. And then so I just wanted to talk really, really briefly about two things. One was the service learning course that I took, which facilitated directly. As soon as I got back, I enrolled in a course called Theory to Action, Community Engagement in a Social Justice Framework, which was centrally concerned with the framework of Freire. That was the first reading of the course, and helping us think through the nature of university-community relations and how to engage in community service in an ethical and productive way. And I was placed with SEIU, which is one of the fastest growing unions in the country, and Minnesota Project Soul, which was also working with workers who had been laid off due to no-match letters, which connected me with other elements of the immigrant rights movement, which I had been working with before I went to Venezuela. And so I just wanted to talk about the two sort of central ways which the grant continues to contribute to my contributions to local organizing. The first is that we're still developing a tour of two workers from the automotive industry, which were the workers that I was working with, to come tour the automotive industry in the United States. The automotive industry in Venezuela is facing a similar crisis as that here, and a lot of the parallels in terms of production and what's happened with factory abandonment, what's happened in relationship to transnationals moving, the breakup of production. These are similar conversations that are happening in both places, and as a result of my participation in conversations here with the automotive unions, mostly out of Detroit, and the ways that they distribute those conversations, and with sort of first-hand knowledge of the community or the conversations taking place in Venezuela, we're organizing so that two workers can come and do a tour talking about the models of organizing and conversations that are taking place in Venezuela. So that's perhaps the most direct sort of continuation of how the grant is informing my work here. But more broadly speaking, questions of engaging with movements as somebody who has considerable amounts of privilege, and what are effective ways of leveraging that privilege without sort of assigning yourself positions of expertise, which can be difficult when you're within the confines of the university that wants you to produce yourself in that way. And so it often takes a significant amount of conscious conversation within your own head and within the communities around you to sort of understand the ways in which you can be productively engaged in these movements in ways that don't reproduce unequal power relations. And that was, I think, core to what Freire was trying to think through as he wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Great. Thank you. That was very good summary and probably quite different from the experience I had, but the basis of the Paula Freire ethos, I'm sure, pretty much the same. Thank you. So I do have a couple of pictures here. I'm going to be looking back to make sure I'm staying on track with everything. Just to give you a little background about how I found out and got engaged in the Paula Freire grant. Actually, I was working with the Y Buddies program at the University YMCA. Some of you might know of that or be engaged in it as well. And there was one night that we had Laura come in and speak to our group. I don't know if you remember, but we watched a clip of Extreme Home Makeover, and she was talking about community service, and that really kind of got my mind reeling about how I could get even more engaged other than working with the YMCA and Y Buddies program. And then coincidentally, I, at the time, was an elementary education major and a French major, so double major. Spent a lot of time in Falwell Hall and was walking, as I'm sure a lot of you do, was walking down the hall and saw the flyer for the Paula Freire grant, and that really just put my mind in motion of how I could make these connections and how I could really propose this project to go to Senegal. And so, oh, that's okay. Yeah, I'll just kind of reference them as I go. So I'd always had a passion and interest in West African history and culture. I think it sparked in high school when I was taking French, and then I had a really great high school teacher who had gone to Senegal for a year, I believe, and she would tell us stories every day and just about how amazing the people and the culture really were. So all of this kind of came together to the optimal project I proposed in Senegal. Initially, I proposed to start in Dakar. And since I was an elementary education major, I wanted to teach English to kindergartners or elementary age students. So I put together a partnership with the YMCA here, the University YMCA, who put me into contact with the Chicago YMCA, which is the headquarters of all the YMCAs in the U.S. And they were wonderful enough to have contacts in Senegal, and they really constructed my homestays and a lot of the project. So that's how that all came together. I went to Dakar first for a week. This is the first week I was there, and I observed a couple kindergartners, the wonderful, cute kindergartners, and the teaching styles were not completely different from in the U.S., but there were definitely characteristics that were different, especially in the discipline over there was a little bit more than I think we get in kindergarten here. And a couple other things, just their style of teaching was really interesting to observe. And I thought I would be staying there the whole 9 weeks in Dakar, but I came to understand through my boss that there was more of a need for me to go into the southern region of Ziguinchor, specifically the Casamance region. And just a little bit of history, the war in Casamance in the southern region has been over for about 15 to 20 years, but there's still a lot of aftermath. And several of the villages were completely burned down, destroyed. A lot of people fled to Ghana, Gambia, to local surrounding countries to get away from the conflict. So at this point, the YMCA of Ziguinchor, where I spent 8 weeks, is still trying to reconstruct the villages, and they conduct yearly or biannual, I think, evaluations to 10 surrounding villages that they work with. And they just pretty much go out there and ask them what kind of tasks, what kind of activities do you really need us to do this year to help the village and to get it to where it used to be before the Casamance War. So that's where I started out. For about 2 weeks, every other day, we would go out to a different village. I would go out and get to know the different village members. We'd have discussions, and a lot of it was in Wolof or Jola, which I clearly didn't know going there. So it was interesting sitting in on the meetings. They did speak French, I would say about 60% of the time, and when I was speaking to people, they would speak French with me, but I think the comfortability level was higher when they could speak Wolof or Jola or whatever language they were most comfortable in. So that was a really intimate way to get to know not only the YMCA members that work there, but also the people that live out in the villages. So there I did that, and then I also did get to teach an English course. It wasn't to elementary age students, it was to the members of the YMCA, and there were about between 20 and 25 members. So I taught a 5-week English course. And here we are meeting inside the YMCA in the Ziguinchor towards the beginning of my stay, just talking about the different villages and what their needs were. But the range of ages that I taught English to were 18 to 40 about, which was, at first I didn't think would be harder than teaching the elementary students because they have short attention spans and they can be a little bit challenging. But actually it was more challenging teaching and coming up with a different teaching plan every day for the 18 to 40-year-olds because each one of them had a completely different level of proficiency of English that I kind of had to tailor the teaching plan to. So it differed every day, but it really, I did a lot of dialogue, I did a lot of group work, and from what I know, I think they really took a lot away from it, and it really kind of strengthened my relations in getting to know them, but also with each other too. And I can tell that they had at least a better knowledge of business English, which was what they wanted to learn. So then after that, we continue to do the village evaluations, and there's one village in particular that stands out in my mind and probably will until I'm the last day I'm here. There's a village called Batiniere, and the other villages had been out in the woods, kind of tucked away, beautiful, beautiful places, but this one I noticed was different when they told me I had to wear sandals and waterproof shoes, to work around the water. That was something interesting. So we showed up the next day, and we took a canoe out to the village, which we hadn't done before, and it was this beautiful, scenic, rivery trip there. And then we pull up, and there's just mud completely around the village. And wondering how the heck we're going to get on land, and then these people come and they pull our canoe up. And so they met with the villagers, and they were speaking Wolof, and we got finished. And I assumed we would leave the way that we came in, which was by the canoe. And my boss goes, "No, we're going to take a little detour. We're going to take a little walk." And so I'm like, "Okay, I could do this. That's fine." It was about 100 degrees probably, mind you. And so we start on this little tiny winding trail, which is fine. It's out in the woods. And then there come 2 planks over a body of water, and I'm supposed to cross. And so my balance isn't very good, but I got over it. And then there were these expanses of mud. So every other plank we walked over, there was mud, and there were sticks underlying that you couldn't see. So if you stepped in the wrong place, your foot would roll over and you would get injured. And then if you didn't put your sandals on when you got out of the mud, then you'd burn your feet on the bottom. So by the end of the trip, I was sunburnt and very sore. And I got back to the truck, and my boss goes, "So how did you like that? What did you think of that experience?" And I just kind of shook my head and smiled. And he goes, "Well, I wanted you to experience that because that is the same route that the children take every day to and from school, 2 times. And it's about 1.5 kilometers each way." So that was one of the most, I think, transformative experience, and a very humbling experience to just kind of show me what a lot of these kids have to go through, because after the war, a lot of the schools were burned down too. So if the village is small enough, they don't have their own school, so they have to walk very long distances. So that's something that stood out in my mind. At the end, the culmination of the trip was a 10-day international work camp. It was the first time I was able to speak English. We had about 10 people from Connecticut come over from another YMCA in Connecticut. And then we also had about 90 other volunteers from Gambia, Ghana, and Spain that came over. And we spent 10 days in Enempor, which is a larger village, and we all stayed in this large unit. And we just planted citrus trees, we dug wells, we painted schools, and really did everything that they needed. So that was the cap to the end of my trip. And really coming back was a very interesting experience coming back to the U.S. because I realized how much we really take for granted here, and how different the level of hospitality was of the people there. I had never experienced people coming towards me with wide open arms, inviting me to dinner or to stay in their home or whatever it was. So I really kind of interested I've changed major since then. I've gone into journalism in French. I've kept the French major, but I'm planning to go into international journalism, hopefully working in Africa, eventually in France, Europe. And then I also plan to go to law school to study human affairs and eventually return back to Senegal. I still maintain really good contact with a lot of the people I've met there. And I've been involved in the Society of Professional Journalists too, which have conventions to talk about international human affairs issues and how you as a journalist can tell these people's stories and shed more light on cultures and people that may not have had their story told. So I think that about does it. This is where we were working in Enempor during the 10-day international work camp. There's a picture that'll come up of a little boy kind of looking out in a harbor, and I actually came back and I was looking through all my pictures, and I'd taken a lot of really phenomenal emotional pictures, and I decided to submit that one to the 2007 International Photo Contest through the Study Abroad Center, and I ended up winning with that photo. So, yeah, and that's the home that I stayed at for the majority of my time, and some of the people that I was staying with. So, yes, that one. Yep. Right.
Well, thank you, Allison and Sophie. Before we move into some questions here, I did just want to acknowledge the students who will be going abroad this summer for the Paula Freire grant. So, Katrina, Joy, and Hannah, if you would like to stand up and introduce yourself and tell us where you will be going this summer and just briefly what kind of work you'll be doing.
Okay. Hi, my name is Joy McBrain. I'm a junior here. I'm going to be going to Chimbote, Peru. It's about 6 hours north of Lima. I'm going to be doing work with domestic violence. Peru actually has the largest rate of domestic violence globally, 70%. So we're going to be working there. I built a battered women's shelter there last summer, and this summer I'm going to go back to do programming, like self-empowerment training, different things like that, so that the women can become more sustainable and they don't have to depend on someone else to get, basic things. It's also it's said to be the world's largest poorest city. It's 460,000, so in perspective, Minneapolis is about 400,000, and the first women's shelter was the one we built last summer. So we're taking steps towards getting to be a little bit more modern of a society, but still taking into consideration, of course, the Freirean philosophy. So we're going to be working together to figure out what works, what makes most sense to create social change there. So, yeah.
Hello, my name is Katrina Dicker, and I will be going to Calcutta, India. I'll be working with a group called SWAYAM. It's an NGO, and SWAYAM means oneself. And it works with women to stop, it works directly with women to stop violence against women. And they've started an initiative that I find really amazing and unique, where they take the women who've come to their support centers and come to get legal advice from them, and they've started a theater group, which is used to promote, used as a popular education tool to go around and spread the issues to many different people. And also, it's used also for them to have a place to speak about their issues and not have it be untold stories anymore, but bring it to the forefront. So I'll be working with that group. I'll be working particularly on focusing on how we can use discussion techniques after performance, because now they've just been doing performance and not talking afterwards, and I'll be engaging with them to talk about how we can figure out how we can discuss after the performance and engage the audience in discussions about how we all together globally and within the society in Calcutta, India, can end violence against women.
My name is Tanya Marku. I'm going to Vancouver to work with housing and homelessness, which is something that I'm kind of involved in here in Minnesota. I'm designing my own major, and it's called Race and Activism. And right now I'm doing some things with public space and the use of it in my neighborhood in Phillips. And so I'm excited to go to Vancouver, a city I've been to many times, and I have some connections there to do similar work with two organizations. The first is Pivot Legal Society. They're a legal advocacy society, but I really kind of like their frame because they are based in the downtown East Side neighborhood, so it's place-based work, very similar to what I do now. And they kind of direct their caseload based on issues in the community. So right now they've been doing things with homeless folks that have been squatting in buildings or have been using abandoned buildings to sleep in the evening, and they're trying to get those buildings to be legal places for these people to spend the night. I also will be working with Justice for Girls, and they work with homeless teenage youth, and they're really focused on the intersection between homelessness, sexism, racism, and homophobia, which is an interesting frame to looking at homelessness, I think. So that's my work.
Great, thank you. Well, as you can see, this grant really attracts the cream of the crop here at the University of Minnesota. So we would love to take some questions now from the audience.
Hi, from the information that you shared, it sounds like this is a grant-funded activity. And so how long will the grant be around, and how many more grant cycles do you have in funding? And what's the best way for students to learn about this program?
Okay, funding. That's the difficult question. Right now it's on a year-to-year basis, and previously the grant began out of the International Student Travel Center, ISTC, which merged with Global Campus to form the Learning Abroad Center. And at that time, the grant was sustained for many years through funding from the ISTC office, as well as the what was formerly the Career and Community Learning Center. That funding ran out, 2 years ago now, and it's just been on a year-to-year basis from the Learning Abroad Center. So we have awarded money for this upcoming summer, but as of right now, we hope to receive money again from the Learning Abroad Center for next summer, but it's not guaranteed. We are looking at alternative funding sources, like applying for various grants for global engagement here at the university and elsewhere. So funding is definitely something that's an issue, and we hope to receive going forward, but as of right now, we haven't received any sort of sustained commitment. As far as the best way to learn about the grant, I think from all of you that are here today can talk to your students about the grant. We have it advertised on both of our websites, and we also do an info session every fall about the grant. And then we also hope that all of the students who receive the grant will be going out and talking about their experience in their classes, to their friends, to their roommates and things like that, so the word can kind of organically spread about the grant. Thank you.
I know this is the case with study abroad in general, but do you see a really big gender gap in terms of who's applying?
Yes, we have had all women recipients here today, haven't we? That's tough to say. I would say yes, it's definitely more female applicants, and just because of that, I guess there have been more female recipients. Last year, we had one male student who received the grant. The year before, we had a male student. We did have some male applicants this year, but we didn't award them the grant.
So are the grants available to students in the University of Minnesota system, not here on the Twin Cities campus?
This grant is not. It's just available to undergraduates at the Twin Cities campus.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. But we hope that other campuses might be able to develop something similar or find some funding mechanisms as well.
I'm curious about the history of this grant, and was it a faculty member that started it? Because it seems in many ways to go against the establishment. So I'm just very curious about who had the courage to start such a grant.
Yes, that's a great question, and maybe both of you can jump into if you have any further knowledge. But my understanding is that it was really student-founded. The International Student Travel Center was a student-run office, and they advised mainly on non-credit opportunities abroad, whereas Global Campus was more focused on academic programs that awarded academic credit. So yes, it did come about from students. And David, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah.
Okay, go for it.
Well, I'm from the formerly Career and Community Learning Center, Community Service Learning Center now. And this is a lot of what we do in our work, or what we try to do in the pre-service trainings that we do for these students. Used to be involved in them, but for the students that are doing service learning here locally, we talk about Paula Freire in the servings, the trainings. We talk about Ivan Illich. So this really does try to embody the work that we do, and I think that's why it's a really unique partnership. Especially, our office is involved specifically to bring it back here to the local community. That's mainly what we work with, but really blending the work that we try to do and the model of service learning that we try to do here on the Twin Cities campus, and blending that with the international focus.
Other questions?
Well, thank you all for coming today.